Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. I am here with Werther Marciales here. He is with New Patriot Rebellion, a new group that has come up that is based on conservative leadership and principles and is basically working to forward the conservative viewpoint in our government today. So let's say hello to Werther here. Thank you very much for joining me today, Werther.
Thanks, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. And very excited to talk about New Patriot Rebellion. I happen to be the Chief Policy Officer, so willing to get into what we're doing, what our stances are, and why our organization is necessary.
Excellent, excellent. So tell me a little bit about yourself, how you basically your background in politics, what brought you to the point of joining, and I believe you're a part of founding New Patriot Rebellion. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm one of the founders. Well, I guess we can go all the way back to when I was 18, right? I'm 31 now. But when I was 18, I would say I was left of center, definitely in my beliefs, which I think is pretty common for people that are young and, go through a schooling system, which has been largely captured by the left. So I actually, to my great shame, voted for Obama in 2012. So I know, very unfortunate. But what's interesting is my evolution towards the right actually began in college because I studied economics. I had that was one of my majors with a minor in mathematics, and I also have a degree in political science with a minor in philosophy. And I studied those primarily at FSU. You start learning about economics, you inevitably shift more right wing because you find out that the left wing economics is, there really is no left wing economics in terms of anything that is cohesive or makes sense or works right in order to further a nation's prosperity. So that began my rightward shift greatly in terms of economic policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy. My social views stayed left of center though for a while. What started to change, my social views started to shift more to the right during COVID, actually, during the lockdowns, as well as almost everything else. I think many people probably experienced this during 2020 and beyond. They probably became, if they weren't already, a lot more skeptical of government power. They became a lot more skeptical of left-leaning social movements, and people that profess that they believe in liberty, but then at the same time, we're advocating for the entire country to be locked down for a year plus. I think for a lot of people, it shifted them right on a lot of things. Gun ownership too, right? We actually had 10 million new gun owners after the COVID lockdowns, for very good reason. I was actually one of them. I'd always, that's actually one thing I'd always been pro Second Amendment. Even when I was left of center, the Second Amendment was very obvious in its need for me because ultimately all politics is done at the point of a gun. Force is inherent in every political discussion, and in every policy, in every outcome, right? Because ultimately our laws are enforced by force or by the threat of force. And so if you understand that, then you understand the need for the Second Amendment. You understand that if the people are not the ones that are capable of force, then there is tyranny because the only person or the only entity capable of force is the government who governs them. And then they do not need to be responsible to what the people desire for them to do. So anyway, my social views became a lot more right of center after COVID. And then as I was preparing to have a family and as I was getting married to my wife, they went even further to the right. And so I would definitely say for the last few years, I have been a fully fledged conservative. I consider myself extremely right wing on basically every belief that I think is important for a conservative movement to actually be successful. And I'm happy to talk about any of that. But, I think like many people, my political evolution came as a result of seeing the real life consequences of bad decisions and the real life consequences of not being civically involved and informed of what your government is doing. So that radically changed for me after COVID because, I think like many people, I had a general sense that, well, I'm not involved in politics, but I'm sure that the people involved in politics know what they're doing. They're involved further, they're involved because they have expertise in this kind of stuff. And so, I have my general beliefs that I'll vote on and things like that, but I'm not going to pay too close attention. And then, right, you take a peek behind the curtain and you're like, oh my goodness, the people running the machine are complete morons, or
Yes.
they're totally corrupt, or they're grifters and they claim to believe one thing and they don't actualize it in terms of their policy outcomes. And I need to get involved, right? I have to, like, once you see how things work and how bad things really are, like, the only conclusion is that I must involve myself to fix this. Because if not, then our country is going to be destroyed. If we let these people continue at the helm, then we are no longer going to be a nation at some point in the near future. So that's why I got politically involved, is because I care about my country, I care about my community, and ultimately I want to leave a better country, a better nation, a better community for my son than the one that I grew up in, because I grew up in, I was born in 1994. I was born at the absolute peak of American power, right? When we were the uncontested global hegemon, where no one could even attempt to challenge us, whether it be economically, militarily, culturally. We were the dominant force in every metric that you could possibly think of. And I want to go back to that. And that requires a revolution in our thinking and in the people that are making decisions in basically every level of government. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Sounds good to me. Tell me, you mentioned something that you evolved from a left-wing side as you went through college and your early life and getting married, and ended up on a very far-right conservative viewpoint. But many people who have made similar journeys in their lives have ended up more populist than conservative. What's the difference between a populist and a conservative, and why did you end up on the conservative side of that particular fence?
That's a great question. I think ultimately, the conservative understands something that the populist does not. I think populism is more driven by emotion, by a desire to change certain things immediately without regard to the means and sustainability of that change. Whereas a conservative is grounded in historical truths, in history, and in what has been successful civically for our nation's history and for the history of past republics. And they understand that change must come gradually and thoughtfully and strategically, in order for it to be long lasting. Now, that is not an excuse for inaction, and that's not an excuse to accept, baby steps in certain directions when we could be pushing much further in terms of what we want in terms of policy outcomes. But I'll put it this way: the conservative understands that they may not necessarily understand exactly why Chesterton's fence is there. But they know that before they tear down that fence, they need to really, really have deep understanding of why it was built, and they need to be able to articulate an argument of why that institution or why that fence needs to be brought down. Whereas I think the populist is just like, this institution, this person, this layer of the Constitution or the government is in the way of what we want to do, and we need to tear it down. I forget from what novel or what conversation this was from, but someone from England, proposed to another person. And I hate that I don't remember the names, but he said, would you cut down the law to get at the devil? And, the other person responds, I would cut down every law in England to get at the devil. And so the other person responds, and when you cut down every law in England, what do you think is going to protect you from the devil? Right. And so the understanding here is that the rule of law, the Constitution, the political norms, both cultural and legal, that we follow in America are there to protect the people from radical revolutionaries that haven't thought everything through, or that even may have dictatorial aims from implementing their agenda right away in such a way that it can never be taken back. Right. Our founders understood the dangers of mob rule and populism. They wrote and spoke about it at length. Which is why our government is structured the way that it is. It's very difficult to, create transformational change in one election cycle. They understood that there needs to be a balance of power. We can't make one branch too powerful in comparison to the other, and there needs to be representation by the people, which was meant to be the House of Representatives, by the states, which was meant to be the Senate, and it no longer is, which is a big problem. One of the things that we need to do is get rid of the 17th Amendment and put the Senate back in the hands of the states. And then, of course, the president, right? Which yes, is elected by the Electoral College, and they have a lot of power vested in one person, but it's balanced out by Congress, which controls the purse, and it's balanced out by the judiciary, which through its interpretation of the Constitution and public opinion can also stop the executive or the legislature from overstepping. So that's where I align myself. I'm most definitely a conservative. I think conservative grounded movements can benefit from a populist element, but we don't want those people. We don't want those people at the head of it, right? We need to be centered in logic and strategy, and in civics and history, and not just emotionally driven by the whims of the moment.
You mentioned in particular, and I think the theme there was executive overreach, which is pretty relevant to our day today. What ways can these other branches of government actually rein in an overreaching executive in this day and age? How can conservatism help to drive that change?
Well, everything that the executive tries to do must be funded. And so the legislature, by controlling the power of the purse, can just choose to defund anything that the executive wants to do. Some people consider the legislature the most powerful branch for that reason. Any kind of military operation, or any department or anything that the federal anything that the executive wants to use in furtherance of their policy aims is funded by Congress.
Right.
And Congress can revoke that funding at any time, and prevent them from doing it. But Congress has largely abdicated its powers of the budget, and they're willing to just let the administrative state make their own rules and regulations. Which, after Chevron got repealed, that's been curtailed in a big way. But Congress was happy to do this for a long time. And I think it's because, our Congress people are lazy. I also think they don't understand the nature of many of the problems that they legislate on. And I think that many of them are just in it because they like being, they like being in Congress. They like the name recognition it gives them. They like the authority that it gives them. And they like that they can use it to enrich themselves quite easily if they so choose. And so that's a problem. We need to get better people in office. One of the things that I would like to see is more former military running for Congress. I think if you are in a position of authority over our troops at the federal level, then you should have served. And that used to be very, very common. I mean, back in the 1940s and 50s, I believe 3/4 of Congress roughly had some form of military service. And I think many of the frankly stupid isolationist populist ideas that you have right now that are coming out of the right wing are because we don't have as many people in Congress that have served in the military and understand America's role in the world and how us being the hegemon has benefited us in so many ways, how us being the global reserve currency has benefited us in so many ways. I mean, we print so much money. Why do you think we have so little inflation when we print so much money every single year? It's like, well, we've distributed dollars throughout the entire world. We have other countries buying our debt en masse. And so that lets us, deficit spend, and not feel the inflationary effects as much. But obviously, that only goes up to a certain point, right? At some point, the bond market starts calling your bluff and saying, you know what, I don't think you'll be able to pay this back. And we're starting to see that. And so, there's lots of ways that Congress could rein in an executive, but really what you're seeing is just Congress completely under the thumb of Trump. They're all afraid of being primaried if they go against him. And frankly, they're willing to sacrifice the long-term financial solvency of the country in order to protect their reelection. And I think that's deeply immoral. I think Bob Good unfortunately lost his race, but I think he's a perfect example of a great congressman who is willing to stand up and say and do the things that need to be done and said, and is willing to risk his own reelection for it. And I would love for him to win next year in 26. He's definitely a candidate that our organization would want to endorse. But that's the attitude that people need to go into office on. It's not, I'm going to make compromises in order to get reelected. It's I'm going to further policy in a conservative direction as much as possible, or even just in a competent direction as much as possible. And if I get reelected, great. If I don't, so be it. Right? That's how people need to treat their terms in office, is how far can I move the policy, the policy football forward, right? How many yards can I gain? That's how people should think about it. Your reelection be damned, but that's not the case. And you would think that with our 10-year bond yield approaching 5%, I think I saw it was like 4.63, recently. And, after, they're passing this again, massive spending bill that's going to increase our deficits, and they're promising cuts later on, but that never works. Next Congress always out. They always undo it. They always undo those promises. You're starting to see the bond market freak out a little bit and say, we don't believe that, you deserve the low interest rates that you've had in the past, and so this is a very big problem. And it's concerning to me that Congress is not taking this economic data with the seriousness that it deserves, because, I tell people when I articulate the problems in the country that I think there are 3 civilization-ending risks to the United States. The first is mass illegal immigration, right? Basically, bringing people in or allowing them to stay, giving them birthright citizenship through, this ridiculous interpretation of the 14th Amendment, and, changing the demographics and the culture and the civic makeup of the country, all right, into a way where, Americans that believe in the Constitution won't be able to reclaim it. The second risk is communism. I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. The left has done a very good job since the 1960s of retreating back away from violent political action, like what the Weather Underground did, into just recapturing our institutions one by one, primarily our universities. But, our universities are important because they are the pipelines to produce American elites, and for people that lead in, various trades and important fields. So recapturing those is a big priority. We actually have had a good amount of success in that. But the last threat, I think, is the most serious and the hardest one to solve, and that's the debt. Debt has ended empires numerous times in history where they become overextended, they can't meet their obligations, and then they fall apart. It actually happened to the Soviet Union, right? We really just literally watched an empire fall apart due to economic mismanagement. And I don't want that same thing to happen to us. But there are so many people in Congress that don't view the threat with the seriousness that it deserves, or are just not willing to risk their reelection to actually do something meaningful to address it. So I see that as a very big problem. Fiscal responsibility is one thing that we really look for in the candidates that we're going to endorse. And it's a big policy position of ours as well. So I hope that answered your question. There's lots of ways that Congress can use the power of the purse to stop the executive from doing, most of the things they would want to do. But I think our current Congress is feckless, and they're not willing to do any of those things right now.
I would consider them TV show politicians instead of citizen legislators here. They are much more interested in the trappings of power than they are in doing what's good for the country.
It's called Hollywood for ugly people for a reason.
Exactly. Now, just to support your statement here, Moody's actually downgraded the U.S. credit rating from the best rating of AAA to AA1 just on May 16th. And that's because of the absurd levels of spending we're going through, the fact that we're not paying for that spending through associated revenues, It is definitely on a downward trend as far as our credit goes and the solvency of our country. Now, you mentioned in particular endorsing candidates, and I want to point out that New Patriot Rebellion does, in fact, work both at the state and at the federal level on that. During the most recent, I think it was special elections, you did some endorsements. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we've only done one endorsement so far. We endorsed Kevin Norwood in his special election for Oklahoma House District 74. And he won that election against the wife of an incumbent who was not very conservative, very establishment corporatist type. And he won it by 43 votes. We raised through just getting people together to talk to Kevin and have him explain his policy positions and explain the nature of the race. We raised about $1,450 for him. That was enough for him to put out an additional mailer during the last week of his campaign. And stuff like that could easily swing the 22 votes necessary for him to win, right? And he ran a great campaign. He was able to get the endorsements of the other candidates that were not able to make the runoff. And he was busting his butt, going door to door every day with his campaign and talking to people and winning hearts and minds. And it was great to see him win. I think he's going to be a great legislator for Oklahoma. But obviously, the second part of what we do is we hold people accountable once they reach office. So our endorsement is not perpetual. And once you achieve victory and you're in office, right, we will want you to push conservative policy forward. Now, he is in a state, Oklahoma, which is the reddest state in the country. There is not a single blue county in the state of Oklahoma. They have a supermajority in the legislature. There is no reason why they should not be doing everything DeSantis is doing and more. And I asked him specifically when I was talking to him, and was like, these are the things that DeSantis has done over the last 3 years. Let's go one by one. Tell me what you think about them. He does support those measures. He's very much anti-illegal immigration. He's very much pro-life. He's very much pro fiscal responsibility. And, we had a bit more in depth of a conversation on that policy issue. He was talking about how, Kansas got rid of some of their taxes that they had been doing in some way, or some of their districts had. And he mentioned that that was a mistake because they didn't tie it to cutting of spending. And so they had a massive revenue shortfall. Many of their programs couldn't be funded, and it ended in disaster, right? And he said, I believe in having limited government, but, we need to be smart. And we need to be fiscally responsible about the way that we do it, right? Many people claim to be fiscally conservative just because they advocate cutting taxes.
Right.
And that's only fiscally conservative if you pair it with an equivalent or a greater cut in spending, right? So you can't just decrease revenues and keep spending neutral. That's not fiscally conservative. You're expanding the deficit, right? Very happy that Kevin had won. And this is why these races are important, because in that race, a small four-figure sum in terms of donations, and we had about 16 members at the time, right? Right now we have 53. So we've more than tripled our size since then. But even just a small amount of donations goes really far in a race like that, where only about 1,600 people voted in that election, right?
Right.
In a congressional race, you need $1 million or more, and you still might lose against an incumbent, right? Whereas in these small state house races, right, just with a five-figure sum is enough to win sometimes, right? And for an org that is backing a candidate, if we do some fundraising for him to help him, that four-figure sum that we raise, right, it could be defining in the race. So going into 26, yes, we're going to be endorsing primarily at the state level. We will be doing some federal level endorsements. But, we believe that 2026 is going to be a massive blue wave year. So we don't want to expend a ton of time, energy, and money in getting people past an incumbent in the primary only for them to lose in the general. So we're targeting districts that are R plus 15 or higher, generally that are pretty red, and where there's a problem with the representative, like they are not nearly as conservative as they should be given their district, and they deserve to be booted out, or they're just corrupt, or they're just incompetent, right? Any of those reasons might be a reason for us to endorse a stronger conservative candidate. I can tell you that we are definitely targeting one federal seat, and that's Florida 6,
Right.
Randy Fine's district, because he's just awful. A total opportunist when it comes to his political advancement, not willing to take stances on anything strong, tried to screw over Floridians by passing this incredibly weak, I won't even call it weak, it was basically a de facto amnesty bill in the way that they worded it. So that was a complete betrayal in my eyes. He won this special election because he had the Trump endorsement, and the other candidates, I think, didn't have enough time and ability to fundraise. But I think we have one or two that will be better prepared next year. We are definitely looking into endorsing for that race, because the other thing I can tell you is that Randy Fine is not well liked by a lot of people. And he has a lot of opposition research against him that can be used. And it would be a great victory if we were able to flip that seat, because that's an R plus 34 seat. So even in a massive blue wave year, like I think next year is going to be, that seat is going to remain in Republican hands.
So you're working at the state and the federal level, and we can see it, and you're going to be focusing on the state level. Now, speaking of states, I understand you're up to 2 full state chapters at this point. Which ones are those?
So those are Florida and Texas. So we have 10 members in our Texas chapter. As of today, we have 20 members in our Florida chapter. So it makes sense to me that Florida and Texas would be 2 of the biggest. One, because they're obviously very populous states. But I also think when you've lived under DeSantis' governance, you understand that all of the promises that our elected officials made can actually be kept while they're in office, and the excuses that they use for why they can't do something or push something forward are BS. Because DeSantis, even with the legislature right now that is at open war with him, the Florida House at this moment is in open war with him, he is still able to move the ball forward on conservative policy, right? We had a weather modification ban bill, which got passed by both chambers. We had a bill reforming and making it more difficult for ballot petition amendments to be brought forward, and tightening up the election security measures on that. And we had a great immigration bill, not as strong as what DeSantis wanted, but still a very good immigration bill and actually, I won't call it immigration anymore. I'll say an illegal alien bill, because legal immigrants are totally different from illegal aliens. They are not immigrants. So I have to be careful with my language. I'm trying to make that change.
Right.
But we had a great bill dealing with illegal aliens, which could have been stronger, but it was still pretty strong. It made entering Florida illegally into a state level crime, right? So now it is something that if you are a state or local law enforcement, you have to arrest people in it, because now it's a state level crime. It also gave deportation authority to the FDLE and every local or city police officer in the entire state. Right, they now have deportation authority, and they're working very closely with ICE and coordinating these things. The other things is that bill did, they did have greater levels of punishment if illegal aliens commit a crime. I'm actually not sure if that's constitutional or not. But that is what the opposition tried to do in their original special session B bill, which DeSantis was like, all right, we'll put it into this bill, even though it's not really the problem that we're trying to address, right? Because the problem is not that we need to put criminal illegal aliens in prison, right? We already have laws on the books for that. The problem is that we need to deport not just criminal, just any illegal alien, right? And so that bill greatly facilitates that. And, DeSantis also just recently expanded bed capacity for illegal aliens to 10,000. And he's probably going to continue scaling it up. So you're going to see these deportation numbers start going up very soon. And it's going to be very funny to see what the reaction from so many people on the right is going to be when the majority of them are coming from Florida, which I think is what's going to happen next. But it shows you that even with a non-compliant legislature that's fighting you on conservative policy, on multiple fronts, you can still get a lot done if you actually fight, if you use the bully pulpit, if you communicate with your network of, grassroots people to contact their legislators and put pressure on them. There is a lot that you can accomplish, but it takes coordinated, strategic, directed action, which, DeSantis being, one of the leaders of the Florida GOP, it's a lot easier for him to do. But it's something that our organization can do as well. Targeted pressure campaigns work. And the more people that you can send out text message blasts and email blasts saying like, hey, we need you guys to do this, or through a Slack channel, like, hey, this is what we're focusing on in terms of our legislative priorities. And these are the people that we need you to put pressure on so that we can get this through, right? Having a media apparatus, which is actually conservative and cares about policy outcomes, also very important. All of those things are things that we're trying to do. And I think that speaks to people in Florida in particular, because their standard of what to expect from their elected officials has gone up because of DeSantis. And I think in many other places that are paying attention, it's gone up too. You're seeing it a lot in Texas because, as bad as Florida's legislature is, Texas takes the cake. I think they might be the worst in the country. Just giving power over to Democrats, oftentimes more than Republicans even have, passing their priorities over conservative priorities, promising they'll do things to fight their ridiculous levels of property tax and not doing it. There are horror stories coming out of the Texas legislature, and our members are hungry to make changes. They are hungry to get involved in their county Republican executive committees. They are hungry to get people primaried out, right, and to target the worst actors and send a message next year. So that's why I think those two states have been some of our biggest. I mean, it's more than half of our members are from Texas and Florida. But we have many people in other states as well that, they want to make change in their states and in their counties in the same way. And, they became a member just like you, Brian, probably because you realize that it takes strategic, coordinated action in order to get everything done. Individually, right, conservative activists might be very intelligent, they might be very driven, they might be really, really aware of what's going on. But individually, right, your ability to make change is very limited, right? As coordinating as a group and doing things together with a multitude of experiences and talent within that group is what is going to allow us to succeed. And, when it comes to the populace, for instance, what I like to say is that, look, there's a lot of them, okay? But most of them are lazy and not uninformed, and they don't even bother getting off the couch. So if you just get off the couch and you show up to your Republican Executive Committee meeting and you start bringing in more conservatives or being part of a conservative faction, you can take over your county in one election cycle. It can be done. And if conservatives get active and do the things that the left has been so successful at doing, then we will have that same degree of success.
So kind of to wrap things up here, pick about 3 principles from the New Patriot Rebellion here that you think are perhaps the most important, or the ones that speak to your heart most passionately.
So the first one I'll start off with is life. The right to life is, I think, the most important, and the one that all others basically go off of. If you don't have a right to life, then all other rights are meaningless. So that comes out to not just, self-defense and, granting you the ability to defend your life with the Second Amendment, or to defend yourself and your community against tyranny. But in my view, it speaks in particular to the most defenseless that don't even have the means of self-defense, and that would be the unborn. So in my view, life begins at conception. I've never heard a good argument for any other starting point of when human life exists and when a human should be endowed with rights as when they are born, as when, an egg becomes fertilized and a new life is created. And so we need to make sure that the laws in this country reflect that reality, and that those lives are have the same protections as the born under their state law. So life, I think, would be the most important. The second one is property. If you don't have property rights, if you don't have property rights, then the state can basically own or confiscate anything at any point, and so could anyone else using whatever kind of justification you want to use. So the right to your property being owned by you and being able to be defended by you, I think is incredibly important. In fact, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness before that became the language in our founding documents, it was life, liberty, and property. Because our founders understood, the essential nature of property rights. And so the communists in this country, they don't believe in property rights, right? They want to, and they'll caveat it with like, well, we believe in personal property, right? So it's like, if you have a watch you really like or whatever, then you can keep that. But your house, your domicile, anything else that could be considered of extraordinary value to, the people, what they call the people, that belongs to the state, because they see the state as the extension of the will of the people, which is not a conservative. It's not a conservative view. The state is a necessary evil to basically make sure that the nation is prosperous and strong and well defended. But the actions of government are not always in line with the will of the people or what's best for the people. And that is a view that conservatives would never take, but that's a view that communists take. And so I think our property rights are under threat by them, but also from Republicans. I mean, having a 3+% property tax rate in Texas is absurd. I think property taxes in general are absurd because it means you don't truly own your house. You're just leasing it from the government every year. And if you stop paying that bill, then they confiscate it back. So, it's not just the left that threatens property rights. It's both sides. It's more egregious from the left a lot of the times, but this is why people need to get out of the mentality of red team, blue team. Okay, many of the people that you think are Republicans and are on your team are not, and they're only serving themselves, or they're serving their corporate interests, right? And they don't care about your property rights, right? And they don't care about actually putting it forward and implementing conservative policy. So life, property. The last I would say is freedom of speech. I think life, I think you can include the right to self-defense. You can include the Second Amendment. Having the ability to defend your life, your community, your nation from tyranny is very important. But from here, acts of force are not the only threats, right? Coercion, making it illegal to say certain things that are perhaps distasteful. That is the beginning of tyranny, of worse things happening. And so I'm one of those people that, look, I'm on Twitter a lot, as you are. Right. And people say some truly horrific things. Right. And they say the most horrible slurs and things like that. And I'm of the opinion that I don't even want Twitter taking that down. I want that speech countered with speech. Once you start banning it, you have now set a precedent that you are willing to ban something just because it is distasteful and not because it's an actual violation of the law, like defamation or doxing or things like that. Right. And that's a very, very slippery slope to go down. And we're actually seeing it play out. So if anyone, thinks that, oh, this won't happen here, or, we just want to ban the racist speech or whatever. Right. In the UK, if you critique mass illegal immigration, you could very well be thrown in prison for years. It has happened multiple times, and it is one reason I will never travel to that country. And so I would say, there are many principles that we have listed, but those three are especially important: the right to free speech, and really just the First Amendment in general, to say what you think and be able to express yourself, the right to life, and the right to your property. I think are three very important principles that I think most conservative orgs, I hope, would agree with.
All right, great. Thank you very much on all of that. Now, if people want to get in touch with you or with the New Patriot Rebellion, what are the best ways to do so?
Absolutely. So the best way to do it would be to visit our website, newpatriotrebellion.com. You can either choose to become a member right away, which is fantastic. We would love to have you. As soon as you join, you'll be reached out to by either Camille, our CEO, or Carson, our CTO, and they will give you an onboarding call where they'll get you set up in Slack and Notion and in the communication systems that we use to stay in touch with each other and coordinate action. And they'll start getting you involved in the areas in your community that we want you to be involved in. So if you want to just join, you can just do that, sign up, and then we'll immediately after that we'll set you up with an onboarding call. If you want a little bit more information about the organization first, which is totally fine. Many people want to talk to us first. You can go ahead and book a call through the website. There's a link where you can book a call. You can also DM me on Twitter. I am at RobotDolphin3 on Twitter. I've got the avatar of a dolphin with a trident, right? So you can DM me. I'd be happy to set up a call with you. I like to do this because right now, while we do have 53 members, and that's great for having been really actively pursuing members for less than 2 months, we are still in a small early stage of growth, and we want to make sure that the people that we bring on are mission aligned and ideologically in alignment with our principles and values. So that's why I like doing these calls. That's why before I reach out to someone or book a call, I like to scan their social media timeline and see okay, does this person agree with me with what the problems in the party are right now, right? Do they view the fact that Trump is not held accountable for his policy and his betrayals as a problem, right? If they do, then that would be a good reason to reach out to them, right? Do they actually share conservative values, right? Do they believe in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment? Do they believe in the right to life, right? Do they criticize their politicians for not upholding these principles, right? So those are things that we look at, before reaching out to somebody, because again, we're still small. So many of the people that are involved in the org, like you, Brian, that are still newer, right? Many of them will have leadership positions in the coming year or 2 years. And so it's really, really important that our first crop of people be mission aligned in all of these very important ways. So that's why I like to do these calls. I did one with Brian. I do one with every member that I reach out to, because it really makes me get to know people, get to know the areas in which they can contribute to the org, and make sure that we're aligned with where we want the Republican Party to go and where we want the country to go ultimately. So, like I said, we'd love to have you as a member. If you want to join right away, newpatriotrebellion.com. You'll have to agree to our ethics pledge. That one is a non-negotiable. And then after you choose which way you want to pay your membership dues, Camille and Carson will set up an onboarding call for you. Or if you want to talk to me first, shoot me a DM or hit the book a call button on the website.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Werther. We will, I'm certain we'll be hearing a lot more from New Patriot Rebellion in the future here. And I am excited because I have not seen very many organizations really going to bat for conservative principles. Right now, I'm seeing New Patriot Rebellion really making that effort to get out there and actually make actually look at the policies going on in each state, look at the policies going on at the national level, and looking at it from a conservative perspective, not one that's trying to line their own pocketbooks. That makes a big difference to me. So I definitely appreciate it. We'll definitely be hearing more from you guys in the
appreciate you,
future.
Brian. I'm glad you're a member.
Thank you very much.
I will be happy to talk to you anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. If I could say one more thing, since today is Memorial Day, I think it would be good for everyone today if they can just take at least a minute of their time to reflect on the sheer number of people that have made the ultimate sacrifice to make sure that this country became great, remained great, and became a bastion of liberty and freedom for the entire world, not just its own citizenry. Freedom isn't free, and without these sacrifices, we would not be in a position to fight back at all against tyranny and be able to implement our values. So to all the brave men and women that have given the ultimate sacrifice for this country, thank you. And we have the responsibility to make sure that that sacrifice is not in vain. And what we are tasked with doing is not even 1% as sacrificial as what they have done. Just be civically involved, get engaged, because I'm telling you, you look behind the curtain and you realize that these people are not serving your best interest. The only answer is to get involved and to make sure that the sacrifices that our ancestors made to make this country great are not in vain. So I encourage you guys to join our org, or at the very least, to start getting more informed and getting involved in what's going on in your county and your state.